Hello and welcome to Scribes and Songsters. I'm Veronique Mandel. Our guest today is Richard Peddie, who describes himself as a community builder, a disruptor, and a philanthropist. After a successful career in the business world where he headed a number of major companies, Richard and his wife Colleen moved from the Toronto area to Amherstburg, where they've become enthusiastic supporters of the town. Together, they opened a bookstore, a bakery, a candy store, and are deeply involved in the planning process to build a new hotel in the downtown. Richard has recently released a book entitled Great Small Towns of Ontario. We're going to talk about those towns and what makes them great. He'll also tell us about strategies and actions any small town, or maybe any big town, can use to be equally great. Richard's book also offers some common sense solutions to pressing issues presently facing most municipalities. Richard, welcome back to Scribes and Songsters.
Well, it's always nice to be here. It's always nice to go to Kingsville. It was a town that I considered in my book.
Oh, you did? I can see why you would consider it. I find it really a charming place.
And I was reminded how nice it is as I was driving around. I had a little bit of time. The built form here in the neighborhoods is actually really good. It's superior to, like Huntsville. It's really nice downtown, but the area around it's not very good. But the built form around the core of Kingsville is very nice.
Mm-hmm. So let's go back to you. What made you get out of a big city and come to a little place like Amherstburg? Well,
I'm kind of skirting both worlds. I live in Toronto as well, but 80% of my time is in Amherstburg. I really like Toronto. One of the things I would say is I love the restaurants and I love the art gallery of Ontario and the ROM, and there's certain amenities and I love its diversity. But, you know, I never imagined I would do this. As I always like to say, it was never on my bingo card. I just got into Amherstburg, and one day my wife said, I was heading up the community foundation. She said, I think we can do more. That's how it began.
Wow. Mm-hmm. Were there challenges to relocating, or was it just sort of seamless?
No, I have a house in Toronto. Yeah. And I have a house so we just built there, and we had a country place that, interestingly enough, it was a beautiful country place north of Toronto, but it was too isolated. It was beautiful. It was 100 acres.
Wow.
But there was no walkability. There was no good restaurants or interesting stores. And when we saw I introduced my wife to Pablo one day after a speech I gave at the university, and she says, "Oh, I'd like to move here." And I said, "Well, wow. That means we have to sell the other house." But it's worked out great.
So what was it about your chosen small town that inspired you to write your new book, Great Small Towns of Ontario?
Well, I considered running for mayor of Toronto, and I'm glad I never did that. And first of all, I probably would not have won. But to do that, I really prepared for a year. I started traveling to the Copenhagens, the Amsterdams, and the Berlins. I started reading voraciously, and my book details all the books I was reading. And I got to meet some of the influencers. Some of, half a dozen of influencers are ranked in the top 100 most impactful influencers. In fact, Gil Penalosa wrote the foreword to my book, and he's ranked 13th in the world. And I started getting to them, and so I really started seeing things. And in Amsterdam, in Amherstburg, I thought, geez, I'll try some of these things. But I wanted to learn more, and that's why I started traveling around Ontario last year.
How did you choose those 10? Because I'm sure that you've discovered many interesting small towns.
There's tons of great small towns, tons. I set some criteria, and people said, why'd you set those? And I said, well, it's my book, my choice. Something under 20,000. Amherstburg's actually the largest. As I was driving in, I was reminded Kingsville's 21,000, a couple thousand smaller. So there was size. They had to have an independent bookstore. That's one of the reasons Kingsville did not get in. They had to have a library. Kingsville has a library, and you have the Carnegie original library. It was converted and it's being used very well. So they needed to have a library too. And then I just, started using judgment after that. But they did have strict criteria. The
criteria of having an independent bookstore, I thought, was really brilliant. because so few towns now have independent bookstores, and they always seem to me to be linchpins.
Well, I talk about a concept in my book called third places. First place is where you live. Second place is where you work. And third place is where you go to engage. And it's an accepting, inviting place, and people are drawn. And often that's a coffee shop. You have a lovely coffee shop here I quite like. Mm-hmm. And, or it's a bar, or it's a library. And, but independent bookstores done the right way can really be that. And I had read about that theory about third place as I was opening the bookstore. It's a concept coming out of the sociologists in the 1980s. And I said, you know what, we're going to be a third place. So from the moment we started a third place, and we've done well over 200 events, and all but about 6 of them were free. And it was just, on every topic, climate change, Black Lives Matter, LGBTQT, Save Streets. We covered all of that, and to be a third place.
How would a big city, and you know what, I'll wait and get to that, because I think what I'd like to do first is, and I'm sure people really want to hear some sort of a description of what you found in some of your 10 towns. Do you want to choose some of them? I can
probably do it off by heart. It was very interesting. I didn't know this. They're all heritage towns, except for Huntsville. And an interesting thing, a lot of them aren't protected heritage. We have a new Bill 23 coming through that they seem to be lightening up a bit. But a lot of heritage is at risk for tearing down. So that was it. The other thing, they were close to water. All of them were close to water, which makes sense now because they were all built in the 18 to 1850. And how did they travel in those days? They traveled by water. There was that. The towns, did they have a good selection of retail? Were the arts there? How were the parks? I was really interested in things like cycling. And unfortunately, cycling, none of them get good marks for cycling. In fact, I was asked, well, how do they do? And I said, none of them are doing well. The interesting thing is Amherstburg, I think with a couple of moves, could be the leader of the pack. But I don't see any movement on that. No one's doing climate change. None. I mean, climate change, they're doing things to adapt to climate change, but no one's doing anything to eliminate carbon emissions. No one. And so I talk about, you switch out of cars into bikes, you do more walkability, you protect heritage buildings. Heritage buildings is the best green building going. The building that's built right now is the best green because you're not going to do anything with it. And plant trees. Trees, absorb carbon. So I saw a lot of that. And as I'm going on, there's lots of little things, how to do signs, how to do art, who's doing that, who's doing plaques. And there's a lot of tactics. My chapter on the arts has so many things. And I really drew that from all over. I love something called sidewalk or asphalt art. And I have pictures in my book and stuff. It just, use your sidewalks, use your streets, use your walls as art. And all that collectively makes for a better town.
Okay, I'm going to choose a few. And you can tell me what you found about them particularly. Now, I love Niagara-on-the-Lake. Tell me what you liked.
Well, Niagara-on-the-Lake I almost didn't put it in because it's so obvious.
Yes.
It's ranked consistently as one of the best in Canada. It's understandable. They've got a head start. The center of Canada was there like in 200, and then it was burnt to the ground in the War of 1812. It's got the 3 theaters. So it's got heritage, it's got the theater. And so they're well established. And the mayor's very engaging. I talked to the mayors in all the towns, and some of them were really quite impressive. Not all of them. I'll let them figure that out. And so it's so well established. It's so beautiful. It's one problem that I really didn't have a lot of ideas. Well, it has hotels too. Amherstburg doesn't have a hotel. You've got a really nice Grove hotel here. I think that's and I can talk about the importance of hotels in small towns. They've got 11 hotels. Plus they have tons of restaurants. So and then it's got the wineries around them. So it's a check.
Yeah.
Its issue, I think, is it's too popular. I'm not sure I would want to own a house on some of those streets and I like walkability. I like people around, but oh boy, when I did my research there on a Tuesday, it was packed.
Wow.
Mhm.
Okay, let's go to Huntsville.
Well, Huntsville was a surprise to me. It was not on my short list at all. I was up there. My brother has a property, and it was raining. He's a big golfer. We're not going to golf. I didn't want to walk Algonquin in the rain. I said, "Can we go to Huntsville?" And I drove into the main street, and you're past that bridge, little green bridge. And I went, "Whoa, my!" And they've redone their street to make it narrower and to reduce some parking spots. They retired a street, meaning they closed it and made it all pedestrian access down to the water. And their arts, they're way ahead of almost all of the towns. They've got 30 to 40 reproductions of the Group of Seven. Now, not everyone has a Group of Seven in their backyard, but they've done that. Their events from the 1st of June right to Labor Day, the acts they have are very impressive. So they obviously have a huge budget, and they have that with an accommodations tax. I don't know if they have a BIA. I can't remember, but they've got money coming in, and they've got a lot of different groups working. And I came away saying, wow, it wasn't my favorite town. It was my favorite. Really, we had an art crawl in Amherstburg this weekend. Huntsville caused us to have that.
That's really cool. Okay, how about, and I think this may, you might say that, well, this was a natural as well, Elora.
Laura, everyone knows about the gorge.
Yes.
And the gorge is gorgeous.
But apart from that.
Yeah, it's, in fact, they're expanding that thing so big that, heritage tends to have a height to it. There's a scale to a heritage town. And now they're a little bit outside of the center, but they're building these massive new expansion. And there's some resistance to that in the town, and I kind of get that. But the downtown is so walkable. It's got really good. I mean, there's a couple correlations these have not been proven correlations, but I'll share them. Great town should have a number of places to serve ice cream. I counted 12 or something in Niagara-on-the-Lake. They also should have a brewery. And they had a couple of breweries. They had ice cream. They have a lovely little bookstore there. It was very walkable. I chatted with their mayor, whose background is architecture, I think that gardening or horticulture. And I just said to him, my issue with you is that your streets are very walkable, but there's a grade to them, and there's no trees. And now with heat, and if you're older, or even if you're in the heat, if you get lots of heat, it's not even just older people. And, by the way, you have no benches. So there's no seating, there's no tree coverage, and there's elevations. So that's the one thing I recommended to them. But the town's really gorgeous.
How about Almont?
Well, Almont is a town that no one's heard of. Like people say, I've never heard of that one. And I must admit I hadn't. I thought I should have geographic distribution here. So I have Goderich on the west, and I went as far as almost getting all the way to Ottawa with Perth and Almont. And so I got there, and that was interesting. So that was a heck of a drive. And I can remember turning onto Mill Street, and Mill Street kind of climbs, and I went, wow. So it really blew me away for a bunch of reasons. They have heritage properties that have been restored and not torn down, and repurposed. So a town hall is now a community place. Something else is, I'm trying to think. So they're just converted into things. It was a mill town. So one of the mills is now a condo. But they've respected the heritage design. The warehouse beside it is a museum. So they've done that. They've got the most beautiful river walk. Just beautiful. It's the Mississippi River, not that Mississippi, goes through it. And it's a wonderful walk, great signage. And what am I missing? Oh, I'm a basketball junkie. So Naismith was born there, and there's a museum. But as you go on Mill Street, there's a Naismith's, he's sitting there with a basketball in his hands. And I love that they had a basketball hoop as well.
Yeah, cool.
So it was, boy, Elora and Almont, boy, they're pretty.
So I could go through all of them, but if you were to create the perfect small town, what would you do?
I think it's you can do it, actually. So it's not crazy. We were talking about a city that's close to here. Turning that one around is crazy. But all these small towns, first of all, they're all good. They're all worth visiting. Well, probably for me, I'd like to see heritage, and I'd like to see it supported and renovated and not torn down. I'd like to have the amenities of a independent bookstore and a library. I want the streets to be walkable. I want bicycle lanes. You want a variety of local establishments. I mean, one of the things I really push in there is shop local. You don't shop local, you're not going to have local shops. Yeah. And the big killers are the Walmarts. They just suck all of industry out of town. And so many small towns have been killed by that, and they're hollowed out. So it's all of those things, and all of the arts. When I opened my first business, River Bookshop, we put a mural by David Creed on the east side of our building. There was only one mural in the town when I did that. It was, again, it's on the high school that's being sold, has been sold. It'll be protected, but it's the only mural. We were the second. And then I put 3 by David Dirks, and then I put 2 by Natalie Peters. And now, 4 years later, we have 29, not that I did all of these by a long shot, 29 reproductions and murals across the city in 4 years.
Wow.
So, and because we have the Amherstburg, Art Amherstburg Society, we will do another art crawl next year. We unveiled over 10 this year, and we already have designs for 3, 4, 5 next year.
You talk about something called placemaking. Tell us about that.
Placemaking, and I never memorized the actual definition. It's in my book, but it's really making the streets safe and welcoming. And people like being around other people. And we were talking in the build up to this, we were talking about safety. Safety doesn't come from police officers. In fact, if you've got real busy streets, interesting streets, safe streets, there won't be police officers. You won't need them. With the bad guys don't come where all the people are.
Right.
And so placemaking is parks. It is narrowing your streets. It's retiring your streets. It's letting your businesses move out into the eliminate parking spots. And they did this in Kingsville. On one of the things they built out and allowed them to do that. And not very many have done that in the towns that I went to. Picton allowed a bunch of that. And it looks like now Amherstburg's doing it. But boy, the fight to do that.
Yeah, I know. I remember years ago, a number of people I knew who had restaurants in downtown Windsor, they had to fight and fight and fight to expand out on the sidewalk. And I mean, I spent a good part of my life in Europe. And, if you don't see a restaurant that's sort of got a place to sit in the street, you think there's something wrong with it. On Windsor's Erie Street,
yes.
I know a number of people actually, who thought about opening businesses, in several instances where they would build, and they said the parking minimums were ridiculous, and it meant that they couldn't open.
That's right. Yeah, there's a guy named, I think it's Donald Shoup. I didn't buy his book. It's so thick. It's a very expensive book. And I grasped the concept without having to be near as good as Donald Shoup. But he makes a case for what a wasteful, awful policy that so many cities and towns follow out of ignorance. Now, the interesting thing is I think Vancouver, Calgary, Toronto have all eliminated their parking minimums. But there's a map that I've seen where all the parking minimums are being eliminated in North America. The great, great majority, more than the difference in our populations, the United States is catching on to this far faster than Canada.
We were in Old Quebec just recently, traveling back from Newfoundland, and our hotel had no parking. And so we had to walk down a number of all of these narrow, twisty, wonderful streets to find a place, because there was one hotel and it had underground parking, but it was the parking that was designated for a number of the hotels. Mm-hmm. And so we just dragged our luggage, through 8 or 9 streets, and we were fine with that.
Yeah, not everyone is. I mean,
no, of
accessibility,
course not.
The accessibility rules are going to really tighten up in 2025, and listen, I have that, but I support that. It's at the same time, like some people criticize open air that it's not accessible. No, it's the most accessible thing. And we have one individual who just champions accessibility unreasonably, frankly. And she said open air is not accessible. And then someone else jumps in and said, I use my wheelchair there all weekend and it's fine. So it's open air is very accessible. Not all buildings. Heritage buildings are really tough to be accessible.
And I thought when we were walking to our hotel in Old Quebec, the important thing is for you to be able to drop a person off. So if somebody wasn't able to walk, the 4 or 5 streets, then being able to drop somebody off, I think not making that accommodation is egregious. I mean, if you want to have...
It's so often... it'll be an issue for me when we open our hotel. I'm in New York and I'm passing a hotel and there's a place to pull up. Mm-hmm. I took the picture and sent it to our town council saying, geez, lose a parking spot for accessibility.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. You also talk about something called Porch Fest.
Well, in Porch Fest, I just used one example. I'm not really familiar with it, but when it's described, it was pretty easy to grasp. Interesting, Amherstburg doesn't have a lot of porches. The town that I referenced must have lots of porches. Mm-hmm. But we do, there's the Park House does a kind of a Porch Fest concept behind their porch. But just imagine you put musicians on a porch and you're walking down the street and you enjoy the music.
Yes, or in somebody's driveway.
Yes.
And there's nothing that draws people in more than music.
And that's why in our art crawl this weekend, we did 23 musical performances and 10 each day were on corners. So we did 10 each day. And then we ended with the Windsor Symphony Brass Quintet.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so that my wife and I started hosting that 10 years ago, and we do it in August, but I think we're going to do art crawl. So I went to the maestro and Patty Lozon and said, I'd like to move it up to July. Last year, we did 350 people there, and each year, that was a record. On Sunday, we did 455.
How fabulous.
Yeah, which is great. Yeah. And it's just a perfect ending to all the other musicians all got paid, not much. And I believe that you pay speakers and you pay musicians and you pay artists.
Yes.
Affordability gets to be an issue, but as we get bigger, we'll be able to pay more.
Yeah. Now, I really love the other thing you talk about, the NIMBY and the YIMBY. I'm going to remember that.
Okay.
So you tell folks.
So the acronym is Not in My Backyard.
Yes.
And the other one is Yes in My Backyard.
Love it.
And NIMBY's been around forever.
Yep.
I joke that some of the best urbanists have Jane Jacobs. I could call her a NIMBY because she stopped the Allen Expressway. Thankfully, she did because she was really smart. She was in New York. She stopped. They would have wiped out Soho, the whole Soho district, if the transportation guru had his way. And she fought that, and then she moved to Toronto. So she was a NIMBY. But largely the NIMBYs, they start with, I've lived here forever. It's never evidence-based. It's really emotional. They don't like change. And unfortunately with social media today, they're a lot louder because they have vehicles. And the other thing you're seeing is that, I was reading outside of Toronto, there's a community and the council meetings are so toxic. And our meetings in Amherstburg have their toxic moments. Mm-hmm. Thankfully, in this town, they've got into things like race and gender, and we're not there at all. It's all the issue of Should we close? Should we have open air? Should we allow to have move out on the street with a restaurant? It's things like that.
Yes. So what advice would you have for elected officials?
Read more books. That's a start. And go out and see. I wonder if I was to poll the council here, the ones, how many of these 10 towns have they visited? And I don't mean just driving through. Did they walk it? And, I could get the mayor of all these towns on the phone. They all would talk to me.
Yeah.
And so, they have meetings and don't just, I don't know what you do at those meetings, but go pick the brain of the mayor. It's best practices. Best practices are legitimate plagiarism. Don't plagiarize my book. I'm very mindful of what I quoted here. It's all reference.
He's got it memorized.
Don't quote, don't steal a scientific formula or a technology, but stuff that are in the public domain, go look at them and say, now I can adapt that and fit it into my community. But you got to be aware of it. So travel, talk, and read.
One last thing. Are you having fun?
Again, I never saw this in my bingo card. So when I retired 12 years ago now, I had a really terrific career in running 4 sports teams.
Yes.
You're busy. So I knew I was going to write a book. I'm going to spend the winter in Miami. And I'm going to I was a good golfer as a kid. I'm going to become a good golfer again. I'm going to garden. None of that worked out. And so I always said I was going to be actively retired. I never knew it would be this. And that's what I do. So I'm making a difference and I'm having fun. And there's lots of people. I mean, I was exhausted on the weekend. I was just exhausted, but I'm walking, I'm all over the place. And people are saying, I love what you're doing in town. To which I always respond, thank you for supporting it. And thank all the other people that are now coming in and doing it as well. Because you can't, unless you're Dan Gilbert, you can't do it all by yourself. And even he gets help.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for everything that you're doing. Thanks for being on the show today.
Oh, my
It was
pleasure.
tremendous.
I don't know if I'm going to write another book that gets me back here.
Yeah.
But I never imagined this one, so who knows?
Well, let me know.
Okay.
It was great small towns of Ontario. And that's it for this edition of Scribes and Songsters. Many thanks to our very fun guest, Richard Peddie. Check out River Books in Amherstburg. You'll love it. Thanks to our Scribes and Songsters team, our producer, Brian Sweet, and technical producer and editor, Gary Glass. Grateful thanks to Tony Toldo and the Toldo Foundation, and to Neil and Tina Queering for their support. We are so grateful. But most of all, thank you for watching. Hope to see you soon right back here on Scribes and Songsters. I'm Veronique Mandel. Bye for now.